So recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really touched on something that isn't really said in American politics a lot, but as a British person, I have said consistently, and I have made a video before on this, is that America's political spectrum is really warped from what a conventional political spectrum is. So speaking the other day, just going to get the quote up so I don't misquote her, she said that we don't have a left party in the United States. The Democratic Party is not a left party, it's a centre or centre conservative party, right? She goes on to say, we can't even get a floor vote on Medicare for all, not even a floor vote that gets voted down. We can't even get a vote on it. This is not a left party. And that is something I really, really agree with, and especially coming from a British and a European perspective. So that's why I thought my views might be, I guess, a bit enlightening, even though you've heard someone very smart already say this, and it doesn't actually take a smart person to see this. So, in my opinion, America, right, it's crazy that I see Trump supporters call Nancy Pelosi a leftist, because, of course, leftists really agree with completely and unequivocally supporting the Israeli government. They completely agree with taking massive corporate donations. They completely agree with helping construct the Patriot Act, as Nancy Pelosi did. They completely agree with war on terror. They completely agree with never-ending Middle Eastern wars. They completely agree with just unending corporate influence in politics. Of course, that is not what leftist people believe, right? And people like Nancy Pelosi would be on the Boris Johnson faction of the Conservative Party if we put them in UK politics. Just to give you a sort of indication of how crazy it is, your Democratic Party is even considered a liberal or left party. Well, liberal, it depends what definition of liberal you use. If you use a traditional one, yeah, they are a liberal party. But yeah, it's like having Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn in the same party. And that is one of your two options, and that is meant to be the lesser of the two evils. That's what it's like for you in America. I'm not actually speaking in hyperbole or anything, or I'm exaggerating, because I'm not. Because think of what people like Nancy Pelosi support. She helped create the Patriot Act. You know, people told her, the Bush administration told her about what they were doing, and she helped cover it up and expand it. So she is like a Boris Johnson figure. Boris Johnson even has to pretend he supports things like universal healthcare, because that is what the political window is like in the UK. Nancy Pelosi, like AOC said, most Democrats won't even bring it to the floor for a vote. They don't support universal healthcare, so how is this a left party? So she gets it spot on, and like I said with everything else, when you're supporting war, when you're supporting corporations, corporate influence, when you are a massive advocate for capitalism, that is not a left party. So where does this leave the Conservatives in America? Where does this leave the Republicans? I've always maintained that the Republican Party is a far-right party. It's fundamentally steeped in racism, steeped in fanatical fundamentalist Christianity, and it is fundamentally also extremely probably the worst kind of capitalism, completely, nearly deregulated free market capitalism. It's a far-right party, and does anyone really believe it's anything other than that? Can you say that the Republican Party cares about minorities? Can you say it cares about being anti-war? Can you say it cares about people in general? It's happy to do cuts and cuts and cuts, cut everything to make their donors the richest. And they're the blatant face of corruption, but also mixed in with there is some sort of fascist ideology. Because I believe, if the Republicans have their way in America, look what they're doing with impeachment. It's so clear-cut Donald Trump has broken the law, even just on that Ukraine issue, but on multiple different instances, but they're still supporting him. And if Donald Trump said tomorrow, well, I'm going to abolish democracy, really, we'll just have the Republican Party and we'll control everything, do you think Republicans would object to that? Because we saw that guy, I forgot what his name was, in Congress. He went against Trump and was like, you should impeach him because he's obviously not following the Constitution. And then he's getting ready to be primaried by someone who supports Trump. I think he quit the party, and I think he got kicked out of office as well. Because that's what happens. It's like a Trumpian cult. And it's, fundamentally right-wing, far right-wing, and just believes in the most awful stuff. And I don't really understand how the Republican Party is different from a lot of far-right parties in Europe and everything. How is the Republican Party different from AfD in Germany? How is the Republican Party different than well, I don't think we have a really massive far-right party, but let's say the Brexit Party or some hard-right Conservatives. It's not any different to that. So AOC is completely right that there's no left party. And then what many of you guys say to me, and I say it as well, that leaves you with an awful choice. So if Bernie Sanders doesn't get the nomination, your choice is pretty much, here is a pretty hard right-wing candidate like Joe Biden, who's had awful policies, 1994 crime bill. I don't see any liberals, really supporting stuff like that in terms of the policy. I know a lot of people did vote for it, including Bernie Sanders. But that sort of stuff, that is stuff that the conservatives in this country wouldn't even do. Because a lot of Democrats are hard right, and they'd fit totally in with the new Boris Johnson Conservative Party. And the notion that these are leftists is totally crazy and shows how the discourse is so ridiculous in America. So AOC is right, and I've always maintained there should be a new party, the Progressive Party, Bernie Sanders, AOC, people like that, or they should have an insurrection against the corporatists and kick them out. I don't understand why they don't join the Republican Party, because maybe they've tricked themselves into thinking they have morals, and they're just not as bad. So Obama will just use drone strikes and arm jihadis and do all these awful things instead of just going in and killing them themselves. That's pretty much the difference. And at the end of the day, the only difference is one side will happily use American lives en masse to, get their aims carried out. Whereas Obama and those sort of centrists and right-wingers, in my opinion, they don't do that because they kind of care about their image. They kind of care about the politics and the optics of it. They're not going to use American troops if that's unpopular. But do you see what I mean? It's not really a good choice, is it? A warmonger party, a party full of corporatists, pro-capitalists, people who won't even give you basic, universal healthcare, which has been in the UK since 1948, and in places like Cuba, which are extremely poor, they won't even bring that to a vote. Your left party in America, the so-called left party. And then you have the Republican Party, who are just totally insane, and you might as well be voting for fascists if you vote for them. Let's keep it real. So what kind of choice is that? If Bernie Sanders doesn't win, what kind of choice is that? And yes, of course, I'm not saying people should have, not voted for Hillary Clinton and over Trump if that's the choice. But at the same time, you can't blame people for not doing it because it's your faith in the system is like, who represents me? No one. So the US, even though it won't, because the Democrats and Republicans basically made a deal to keep people like Ralph Nader and Ross Perot, who actually did pretty well in the election, they basically handed the election to Bill Clinton because they cut into all these votes for people like Republicans and just general people who might vote that way. So they're like, we can't have these type of people threatening us anymore, so let's clamp down to make it just a two-party system where the third party can't really affect us anymore. And you see that in 2016. Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, what effect did they have? So you basically have no choice. And in the UK, it's getting to that point as well. Like, we don't really have much of a choice. It's either Labour or the Conservatives, but at least, we're starting, even with our right wing, there is some things they're not insane on, like climate change. The UK's been pretty good on, even with a Conservative government, for example. It is awful on loads and loads of stuff, don't get me wrong. But then we have a left party who actually is for really progressive policies, talking about 4-day work weeks, talking about universal basic income, talking about making a state pharmaceutical company so we can't get ripped off by the private pharmaceutical industry, talking about renationalising a lot of these industries that we privatise to put it back in the hands of the people, like the railway, for example. So that is just a good option to have because I feel represented. I feel like there is a party who will do, if they get into power, will do what I want them to do. Even though, the Labour Party does have its similar problems, but I guess it's way worse. So we have the more centre-left, Blairite faction. But in America, they would be called communists because that's how crazy it is over there. So in the UK, I feel we need better representation anyway. I've said that the House of Lords should be reformed to be a proportional represented chamber. So basically, you just have a general vote on what party you want, and then the Lords gets filled up with that instead. I feel like that's a better option. So we have some degree of proportional representation, but that's just another issue. We do have a multi-party system, and I do prefer it to the American model, but it is frustrating at the same time because Labour and the Conservatives have had it on lockdown since the 1920s, essentially, just the two of them. And then what's happening now with Scotland getting eaten up by the SNP, it means Labour are just not really going to win an election on their own anymore, which is Really frustrating, but that's just the way it goes. You've got to make alliances, and that's what the Labour Party will now have to do. It's going to have to look at the other parties and be like, we're going to have to make alliances to get rid of the Tories. And that's what happens in a lot of Scandinavian countries and a lot of Western European countries and just general countries that have democracies, is that people make coalitions because you have so many parties, representing various interests. The thing with the Americans is that you have two parties that represent the interests of the elite, of the corporations, of the warmongers. It's just one might throw you a bone once in a while, like the Democrats. You might get a better version of corporate healthcare, but it's still corporate healthcare. The pharmaceutical companies still have control. Don't we're not going to make a Medicare for all system because what are you crazy? We're going to have an institution that can negotiate reasonable drug prices. You think we're going to rip off our friends in the pharmaceutical industry like that? Of course we're not. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Sorry if you can hear a plane going by. But, yeah, I think AOC is spot on, and it's refreshing to see someone who just, is aware of the world and is aware of what politics looks like outside of the US, because I feel like most Americans don't. Like, Joe Biden is like a dinosaur. How is he running in the so-called left party's primary? He's like literally a Republican. He might not even get into the Tory party. He's so right-wing. So yeah, follow me on social media at the Cavanacle, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Check out my Patreon in the description. Check out my WordPress. Please join our subreddit on Reddit. It's just r/the Cavanacle. Join my personal Reddit, which is u/TommyCahill1995. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.